Every once in a while in the Torah there is a discussion of things that, while we assume doesn't happen often, but these things from time to time happen. The pasuk in Bamidbar says, "Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amart alehem," speak to Bnei Yisrael, tell them, "Ish ki tiste ishto umal aval mal." If a man will suspect his wife of being not faithful, the Torah has an entire elongated explanation of what happens. This is the entire parsha of Sota. He accuses her after certain circumstances are met. The Kohen takes the name of Hashem, takes an entire parsha, scrapes off the water, scrapes off the lettering, pours it into the water. She drinks the water, and in fact, if she's innocent, she's proven innocent. If she's guilty, she dies, and this is the parsha of Sota. Interesting enough, when the Torah begins, it uses the expression ish ki tiste ishto. If a man will, and it's hard to translate the word, but it should be if a man will give his wife to drink, maybe, accuse his wife, suspect his wife. But the word tiste really doesn't fit any of those words, and it's really a difficult word to understand. Rashi explains that the word tiste actually comes from the word shote, comes from the word insanity or fool. And says Rashi, this is what the Gemara bases its opinion on. Shana Rabbeinu, our rabbis taught us, Eina manafim, no, if the adulterers do not commit an act, people do not commit an act of adultery until a ruach shtus, until a wind of insanity enters them. That's why the pasuk uses the expression tiste from the word shota. If a man accuses his wife of being insane, meaning that's a way of referring to the fact that she had an affair, because only if you have the ruach shtus, only if you're insane, would you have an affair. Now, the Siftei Chachamim is bothered by a very obvious question on this Rashi. And that is that if the Gemara means literally as it says, that adulterers will not commit an act unless they have this wind of insanity, then no human being should be held accountable for that sin. Quite simply, if you're insane, you're no longer responsible. You're not in your rational thinking mind. You're no longer held accountable. And yet we know that there are many, many situations that the Torah holds an adulterer or adulteress accountable. So what does it mean? And the Siftei Chachamim explains that it doesn't mean ruach shtus. He says what it means is until the Yetzer Hara is morelem heter. It means that the Yetzer Hara tells them it's permitted. And that's what it means, ruach shtus. And the adulterers do not commit an act of adultery unless the Yetzer Hara, unless their evil inclination tells them it's permitted. And I think if we stop to think about this Siftei Chachamim and this Rashi, I think we'll find a very interesting question. Let's imagine that there are two types of scenarios. We'll take the first one. Imagine you have a woman who's a very tsanua, a very modest, proper woman. She went to the finest Beis Yaakov's. She had the best upbringing. She went to seminary. And she got into a very bad situation. She married a creep. The guy's a bum. He goes out drinking, comes back at night, beats her. A really bad marriage. As it turns out, she meets a guy after a number of years who's kind, who's nice, who's sweet, who treats her nicely, and she succumbs. She has an affair. Now, here's the question. This Rashi supposedly is telling me that it's not possible for her to commit that act unless the Yetzer Hara tells her it's permitted. How is it possible for the Yetzer Hara to tell her it's permitted? What possible rationale is there to tell a frum Jewish woman that this act is permitted? It may be a difficult situation. You may wish you weren't in this marriage, but the act is forbidden. What possible mora heter, what possible rationale is there to make it permitted? What are you going to tell me? Well, the Torah was given on Shabbos and today it's Tuesday? You see, my friends, mora heter means a very specific concept. Mora heter is when you go to a Rav and he paskins, it's mutter. That means it's permitted. Mora heter means the Yetzer Hara says this act is different. It is permitted. The problem is that if in fact we're dealing with a tsunua, with a modest woman, there's no way in the world the Yetzer Hara could ever explain to her that it's permitted, it's forbidden, it's black and white, there's no question. So Elamai, you'll tell me, so maybe we're talking about a prutza, a woman who's immodest, a woman who doesn't care, a woman who's promiscuous and just doesn't care. If that's the fact, then what does she need the mora heter for? If a woman is just not interested in what the Torah says, there's no olam haba, and there's no God, I don't care, then she doesn't need a mora heter. The reason she does it is because she wants to, period. So on either side of the coin, whether we're dealing with a modest woman, or whether we're dealing with an immodest woman, this Rashi, according to the way the Siftei Chachamim is setting it up, seems to make very little sense. And I'd like to see this evening if we could get a better understanding of exactly what the Siftei Chachamim is saying and exactly what Rashi is sharing with us. And to do that, I think we have to get a better understanding of what makes us tick. And I'll share with you an interesting observation. If you've ever read a book, and it was a good fiction, a good novel, and you found yourself a few hundred pages deep into the picture, and all of a sudden the actor is walking down the street, the person in the book is walking down the street, and all of a sudden 3 thugs jump out and kick and punch. And you may notice that in the thick and the thin of the fight scene, your palms are sweaty. You ever find yourself crying when you're reading a book? You ever find yourself so emotionally involved that it seems like you're there? Well, here's the question. How does that happen? How does it happen when you know it's fake? And if you don't quite hear what I'm saying now, imagine for a minute you're in a movie theater and this beautiful actress comes on the screen and the actor falls for the actress, and all of a sudden you feel in your own heart, ooh. Now, you know fully well that it's a movie and the actress is not interested in you. So what are those feelings in your heart? And those feelings in your heart are something that Hashem put in the human called imagination. Imagination is this very, very powerful tool that Hashem created in me that allows me to envision, to imagine, to be somewhere I've never been before, to put myself in the scene. And in fact, if you'd like to really understand how far this goes, you may note that at the very end of a typical movie, there are a number of credits. One of the credits is given to someone called the casting director. The casting director has a very key part to play. His job is to find the actor who best fits the role. Now, you may say to me, what's so difficult about finding the best actor? Find the most handsome guy, find the guy who's best, most famous. You see, the difficult part about casting director is he has to find 2 criterias. The actor must be believable, and the audience must identify with the actor. You see, when that actor is on the screen and he's paralyzed, and then he fights for many months, for many years, and then he's in that last round of the Olympic trials, it can't be him that's facing victory. It has to be every member of the audience. You see, it's not him running that last leg of the lap. It's you, because the key is to identify with the actor. The beauty of a very successful play, a very successful book, is when you, the reader, you, the viewer, identify with what's going on. And in a certain sense, it's like you're there. It's happening to you. And if you'd like to see imagination in its full glory, just see when your palms get sweaty, when your heart races, when you feel terror in your heart, and you know it's an illusion, but that's the power called imagination. Now, the question is, why did Hashem create this force called imagination, and why did Hashem put it into the human? And I believe the answer to that question is that this force is something that's imperative for our success. And I'll explain to you why. When Hashem made the human, Hashem made us out of 2 very distinct parts. There is a part of me that's called a nefesh sichli, a part of me that's a nefesh bahami. The nefesh sichli is the intellectual neshama within me. That's a part of me that only wants to daven. That's a part of me that only wants to do what's right, what's proper, what's good. That's the part of me that feels another Jew's pain and really, really cares. However, there's another full half of me. There's another full half of me that couldn't care less about anyone but me. In fact, there's another whole half of me that's completely instinctual, that's completely driven by passions and drives. If you go into the animal kingdom, you'll find all of the instincts in the animal world. You'll find them paralleled in the human. There is a nefesh bahami, a physical part of man's soul that couldn't care less about anyone other than his own needs, his own interests, his own appetites. I, the one who's speaking to you, am comprised of both. I'm a synthesis. I'm sitting there with both parts pulling at me. Now here's the difficult part. How do you take a man who's a nefesh sichli, a brilliant neshama, who understands that he was under the kisei kavod? How do you put him into this body and give him free will? I'd like to share with you that free will is one of the most difficult things to give a human. I'll explain to you why. We human beings are incapable of doing something that damages ourselves. I'll give you an example. Let's say I would offer you $100. A $100 bill, if you put your hand in a fire for 60 seconds, just 60 seconds, and this crisp $100 bill is yours to keep. Now, I taught high school for many years, and typically when I make this offer to the guys would say, Rabbi, you really mean it? A real 100? What about 50 for 30 seconds? But you know very well that if you ever touched a hot pot, you're not going to put your hand in a fire for $100, nor for $1,000, because it's self-inflicted damage, it's dumb. So here's the dilemma, if it could be. When Hashem created us, the human, Hashem made us out of two parts. A nefesh bahami, which is the behemoth part of me, with drives, with passions, with instincts, with needs. And then the seichel. The seichel is brilliant. The seichel wants to be close to Hashem. The seichel wants to do good things. The seichel wants to grow. That part of me is so great and so holy that I would never have free will. Why? Because I may have a desire to do things, but I would never do it. I would never do it because I'd understand that it's dumb. The seichel, that intellectual part of me, my neshama would say, how could you act like such a creep? How could you act selfishly? How could you say those nasty, selfish words? How could you lie, steal, and cheat in business when you're hurting other people? And the seichel, that intellectual part of me, the neshama within me, would never allow me to do anything wrong, no matter how much I desired it, no matter how much I wanted to do it. My seichel would say, it's wrong, and stop it. And therefore, if it could be, Hashem could not give the human free will. Because creating the human out of seichel and behemoth, neshama and the physical passions, the human would never sin. Why? Because the human would understand that it's wrong and it damages me, much like my putting my hand into the fire, I would never do it, so too I would never sin. Therefore, to allow for the human to actually have free will in practical ways, Hashem created this force called dimyon, called imagination. Imagination is this ability to live in a fanciful world, in a world of imaginations, in a world of colorings. And with this new force given to man, I can create any sort of illusion that I wish to create. I can be a pirate living in the 17th century out there in the Pacific Ocean. I could be living through World War II as we take the beaches during D-Day. I could be a young rock star. I could be an old man. My imagination allows me such a free reign of creativity that it now allows for free will. Why? Because now when I have a dilemma, I want something, but my seichel says it's wrong, and there's another force that comes to mitigate. Who says it's wrong? Maybe it's not so wrong. Maybe it's not so bad as you thought. Maybe it's different than you were thinking. And this fanciful power called imagination allows me to create different illusions, allows me to believe exactly what I want to believe, and allows me to color that which is absolutely black, make it white, that which is wrong, and make it correct. And I believe that that's the answer for the tznuah. If you'd like to know how it is that a frum Beishakov woman who understands that a rayas is forbidden by the Torah could end up succumbing to this type of situation, it's really quite simple. And there's a thing called the Mor Heter. Mor Heter says, listen, it's very, very hard on you. Look at the creep you're married to, and look how much you suffered, and look how nice this guy is. He takes care of you. When the Torah says arayas, and that's forbidden relationships, this guy is so nice, and look, he's handsome. There's no way the Torah would forbid this situation. And besides which, Hashem is merciful. Hashem understands you need support, you need comfort. I'm sure it's permitted. And as strange to believe as it sounds, that's the reality. And this force called Mor Heter can work. The Yetzer Hara can paint the picture that takes that which is absolutely starkly forbidden, makes it not so bad, colors it, eventually makes it mutter. And in fact, I believe that's the answer for the tsunua. A very religious, pious Beishakov woman could be swayed into believing that it's permitted, because in fact that's the power of imagination. And that's in fact, I believe, the answer for the tznuah. If you'd like to know the answer for the prutza, for the woman who's immodest, for the woman who is particularly on the other side, I think we'll have to understand the human with a little bit more depth and a little bit greater understanding of what actually makes us work. And to do that, I'd like to share with you a very interesting story. In the 1930s, there was a gangster whose name was Two Gun Crowley. Two Gun Crowley was also known as Crowley the Cop Killer. The police commissioner of New York City described him as the most hardened criminal and the most heinous individual he ever met. He would kill at the drop of a feather. Now, Two Gun Crowley met the end of his criminal career when he was ambushed on the west side of Manhattan. He was surrounded on all sides by 150 policemen, and 10,000 onlookers watched while a machine gun battle was going on in the streets of the west side of Manhattan for over an hour. He held 150 policemen at bay for that time. They used everything from tear gas to machine guns mounted on different rooftops. They finally broke in, dropped tear gas on him, and they found him shot over a page that he had penned. He wrote his last will and testament. And on it, I want to share with you what the words that he wrote were. He wrote a certain letter and said as follows: "To whom it may concern, under my coat lies a lonely heart, but a good heart, a heart that would do no man harm." And he signed it, his name. Now, a little bit of background. How did he end up in that apartment in the shootout? A few hours earlier, he was in Central Park with his girlfriend. A policeman on foot stopped him, asked him for license and registration. He was behind the wheel of the car. He could have easily driven off, but why take any chances? He reaches for his license and registration, pulls out a gun, empties the gun into the policeman's body, jumps out of the car, takes a service revolver from the policeman, empties that into the dead policeman, gets back in his car, and drives off. A lonely heart, a heart that would do no man any harm. Now, interestingly enough, he did not die. He was found unconscious. They brought him to the hospital, handcuffed him to the bed. He recuperated. He was tried for murder, found guilty, and given the electric chair. On the way to the electric chair, he was heard mumbling to himself, "This is what I get for trying to defend myself." Now, you may say, a rather strange phenomena, this Two Gun Crowley. What kind of weirdo, what kind of strange psychological aberration is that? But I'd like to share with you that Two Gun Crowley was 100% normal. If you were to give him a psychological battery of tests, he would rank about as normal as you and I. As a matter of fact, Dale Carnegie, in one of his books, writes that he had an ongoing correspondence with the warden of Sing Sing, which in those days was one of the most hardened prisons in the country. And the warden explained to him that every one of the inmates in his jail was absolutely guilty. Every one of the inmates would explain to you why he had to be fast on the trigger finger, why he had to lead a life of crime, and every man there was innocent. And Dale Carnegie's point, and I think it's a very, very strong one, is that I never do anything wrong. When the human being does something wrong, he never says it's wrong and it's evil, but I want to do it. You'll always hear an entire rationale, an entire beautiful version of reality shaped a little different than your and my version, but with that version, I never do anything wrong. And I have found in my short career of life that no human being ever does anything wrong. They'll give you stories, they'll give you rationales, they'll give you reasons, but it always ends up with the fact that what I did was justified, correct, and that's the way it is. I got a chance to see this in a rather interesting way. I was a high school Rebbe for many years, and it was a dorm yeshiva. And one year, there was a fellow in the yeshiva there was a string of genevas, a string of robberies in the yeshiva itself. And they suspected various people, couldn't find it. Finally, they found the guy, and it turned out to be a fellow in my shir. And the strange part about it was, he was a popular guy, a regular guy. He wasn't like a misfit. So I had the following question that I couldn't answer. That you steal, whatever. That you steal sometimes even on Shabbos, whatever. But how do you do these things to your friend? And I had to ask this question, and I had to get to the bottom of it. So I sat down with the fella after he was found out, and we had a nice sort of friendly conversation. And I guess he understood sort of like where I was getting towards. And he said, "Rebbe, you have to understand, everybody has a way to make money. Some guys have a job, some guys get it from their parents. This is how I make money. That's what I do." And here's the strange part. He was serious. He meant it. That's how he made money. It wasn't stealing. It wasn't he was a thief. It was just, that's how I make money. Some guys sell hot dogs. Some guys have rich parents. This is what I do to make money. And I'd like to share with you why that is. The reason for that is because I can never do anything wrong. You see, when Hashem made the human, there's a part of me that's so great. There's a part of me that so clearly understands that I was created for greatness, that I could never do anything wrong. I would never allow myself to. And the only way I could have free will, and the only way I could do something that in fact is wrong, is by creating this fanciful illusion, this fanciful imaginative scenario via which that which I did is wrong. But you will find over and over throughout the course of human history, people don't see things wrong. I am never wrong. There's a story, there's a rationale, there's a reason. There was a ganef in Europe, a very interesting story. There's a known ganef in a town in Europe. The stucker box was missing. The Rov calls the ganef into his office and says, Yankel, a stucker box, stealing from an iyam. The thief gets incensed. Rabbi, what I do for a living, I do for a living, but steal from a iyam? You suspect me of that? A chutzpah? And he was serious. What I do for a living, I do for a living, but stealing from poor people, that's a crime. That's stealing. I would never do that. But you see, that's who we are. The way we are is that I can't live with that guilt. I can't live with that understanding that this which I'm going to do is wrong. I won't do it. I wouldn't allow myself to do it. The greatness of the human is such that I would never allow myself to do it. And the only way I could do it is with this fanciful power of imagination that allows me to take that which is wrong and make it right. And Hashem gave us that power to give us the opportunity called free will. If you'd like to understand the prutzer, if you'd like to understand the promiscuous woman, what she needs the moraheta for, it's really quite simple. You see, you could say, I don't care about God, I don't care about the world to come, I don't care about anything, but deep down you know it's wrong. And deep down no human being would ever do something that's wrong and say, I'm doing it anyway. Every human being, before they do a crime, before they do a certain act, will come up with an entire rationale to explain to you why it's permitted. And by the way, my friends, if you'd like to know how far this goes, if you study the Nazi rhetoric, if you study the Nazi writings, they never say the words, the Jews were right, but we hate them, we want to kill them anyway. There's an entire rationale, an entire worldview of Weltanschauung that explains to you why the Jews are vermin. We have to do that to help the world. Why can't you just say the words, I hate them and I want them dead? And no human being could do that. And any human being, before they engage in any sort of act, no matter what it is, will come up with an entire rationale, an entire thought process to explain to you why it's mutter, why it's permitted, why it's really okay. And that is a tremendous, tremendous concept. I think what the Siftei Chachamim is teaching us is a great yesod for understanding life. If you have a woman who's a very pious, great woman, she never could sin. Oh yes, she can. You know how? Because the Yetzer Hara comes and tells her it's really okay. It's different. And this is not what the Torah forbids. That's ludicrous. It's silly. Don't worry about it. The Yetzer Hara can paint that picture because that's a power of imagination. And the flip side, if a person is not that religious, not that tuned to morality, they need the heter because without it, they would never do it. And my friends, I want you to know that this is a tremendous, tremendous concept for understanding yourself. If you ever would like to be a successful human being, surely if you'd like to be successfully married, I guarantee that this is one of the most important concepts that you must come to understand. And that is that I have a very hard time seeing myself being wrong. It's very hard for me to hear that. It's very hard for me to stand that. I had an interesting situation that happened with exactly this concept. When I was a Rebbe in high school, probably my closest friend in yeshiva was the Menahel, was my boss. Rabbi Baruch was my boss, but we were very close friends. And I would sometimes come late to shir. And I wasn't that I was a batman, but I was involved in talking to the guys, whatever. And I remember very distinctly, if shir started at 9:35 and I was walking up the stairs at 9:36, I would be beating myself up. And I'd be yelling myself, how can you bittul Torah, how can you come late, the guys are there, what's wrong with you? And I'd be literally beating myself up. One time, Rabbi Baruch came over to me and said in a very polite way, very nice manner, you know, maybe it's possible to start the shir more on time. And the strangest thing, in my mind, I was like, chutzpah, tell me to start on time? A chutzpah. What kind of business is it? Why are you telling me that? And it was strange, because here was a friend of mine who was telling me something that I knew was 100% right. I knew it was right because I used to beat myself up about it all the time. And he said it in the nicest, kindest way. And despite that fact, there was this sort of reaction within me, this almost visceral reaction, this sort of anger. How could you say that? Because the human being cannot stand hearing that I'm wrong. That's human nature. That's the way we are. And that's just part of understanding who I am. And if you'd like to see this in a very real way, it's even more applicable if you want to understand how other people react. You see, I can't stand criticism. I can't stand being wrong. But the strange thing is that all other human beings share that very same phenomena. And it's a rather strange thing that happens when you criticize somebody, when you find fault with somebody. The Orach HaTzaddikim says that just like, imagine for a minute I come over to you and I start punching you. I punch you and I kick you. It's human nature for you to defend yourself. It's natural, it's instinctive. Says the Orach HaTzaddikim, that's exactly paralleled if I verbally attack you. If I speak in a harsh tone, if I criticize you, if I start in your mind being a very aggressive, critical person, he says it's literally like I'm punching you, and it's basic self-defense for you to attack back. And if you'd like to study any fight that ever happens between two human beings, this is invariably what happens. And I believe that this is probably one of the most important things that you need for a successful marriage. I have counseled guys in this, and I want you to hear well what I'm saying to you. Most fights in a marriage start with one party doing something stupid and the other party doing something even stupider. He left his socks on the floor for the 1,555th time. And what does she do? She says to him, "Why do you leave your socks on the floor?" for the 1,555th time. Now, what he did was very, very foolish. What she did was probably as foolish or more. Why? Because what do you think he hears when she says those words? What he hears is words of criticism, words of rebuke. And those words are very, very difficult to swallow. So, what does he say when he hears those words? He says back to her, "Well," and she gets back an earful. Well, what does she say back when she hears the earful? She says back to him her own earful, and before you know it, you have World War III over something that was very, very small and very, very insignificant. And I'd like to share with you, I've said this before in the Shmuz, and I think it bears repeating, there are 3 rules to criticism. 3 very, very important rules to criticism, and those rules are simple to remember. The rule number 1 of criticism is, don't do it. Rule number 2 of criticism is, don't do it. Rule number 3 of criticism is, don't do it. You know why don't do it? Don't do it because it doesn't work. Don't do it because it distances people. Don't do it because it causes the exact opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. And all it does is causes a very powerful sense of, I can't be in your presence. And it's a very, very strange thing that we human beings are very attuned to our feelings. I'm very hypersensitive to criticism when you criticize me, but all of a sudden when the shoe's on the other foot, I forget all about it, and I stop doing it. If you would like to end any fight, I'd like to share with you the great secret to ending any fight. The great secret to ending any fight is learning how to say the words, "I was wrong, and there is no excuse." And not only will it save you from many fights, it'll save you from other troubles in life. I got to try this after many years of learning Musar. I was pulled over by a police officer for speeding. Now, as you know, when a police officer pulls you over for speeding, he has heard more excuses than any 6th grade teacher for not doing homework on the planet, right? "Officer, I wasn't. My wife's pregnant. She's not in the car, but she would be in the car. If she was in the car, she'd be..." Everything you can imagine. Happened to be, I got pulled over for speeding, and I rolled down the window. The officer said, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I said, "Officer, I was speeding. I apologize. There was no excuse." "What did you say?" I said, "Officer, I was speeding. I apologize. There was no excuse." "What?" I said, "There was no excuse." He looks at me. It was a very long pause. He had to make sure that he actually heard the words. He went back to his car and he handed me a citation, a warning not to speed. I took that warning not to speed, put it in a frame. Today it's in my study on the shelf because it took me 10 years of learning Musar to say the words, officer, I was wrong. I was speeding. There is no excuse. And those words were so shocking to him, they actually wrote a citation, a warning not to speed, which I was very proud that I received. But you see, here's the point. The way...
So you not try this in real life, right? Like that, like those warnings from the God, don't really try.
The truth is, it doesn't work in real life now because everything is filmed. From the minute the officer leaves the car, it's all filmed, so he's not allowed to give citations anymore. It was a few years ago. But in any case, the moral of the story really remains the same. The moral of the story is the following. When your wife says to you, you did X, and you know she's right. She's not saying it because she's wrong. You know she's right. What you have to do is learn to, excuse my language, shut your mouth and not say anything back because you know she's right. Maybe she shouldn't criticize you. It would be wiser if she wouldn't. But the bottom line is you're wrong and you keep your mouth closed. And you know what happens? When you keep your mouth closed, she'll say it a second time, maybe a third time. And after a while, eventually she loses the steam because especially if you actually say the words, I'm sorry, it was wrong, she can't fight back. I have counseled the guy to say these words over and over. It was a very serious shalom bias problem that he was having. I counseled the guy to say this, and I told him, you have to say this again and again. I'm sorry, there's no excuse. I'm sorry, there's no excuse. One night he said it maybe 50 times. And at the end of the evening, there was no fight. And I want to share with you something fundamental. He is a normal put-together guy, and she is a normal put-together woman, but they were fighting cats and dogs, dogs and cats, not because they were so incompatible, but because they didn't understand the basics of human functioning. And that is, when a woman criticizes a husband, or a husband does a wife, those are poisonous words. Those are terribly dangerous words to a relationship, because I can't stand them. I can't stand to hear the fact that I was wrong, and my instant reaction is to say back, give back, fight back. And what does my wife hear? Not only does he have the chutzpah to do what he does wrong, he thinks he's right. She gives it back to me, I give it back, and before you know it, it escalates into World War III. And the only solution is to say the words, I was wrong, there's no excuse. And if it sounds difficult, if you understand what divorce court is all about, you understand how worth it is. Because one of the great secrets of learning to get along is learning to get beyond human nature. Learning to get beyond the instinctive reaction. Learning to say, I can deal with the fact that I was wrong. I have to be man enough to admit it. And I have to learn to keep my mouth closed. The moral of the story is on both sides. You have to be very careful never to criticize another person. But you also have to learn to accept it. Learn how to own up to it. And what you find is when you act that way, your wife becomes a very, very different person. She's much more careful about the way she acts because she understands who you are. I think there's a tremendous lesson to learn from this Rashi. And that is, on both sides, not the prutza nor the tznuah could possibly do the sin without a moreh heter. What Rashi's telling us is, you take the most fine woman in the world, she couldn't possibly do the sin until the Yetzer Hara comes and tells her it's permitted. How could he say it's permitted? What makes it permitted? What makes it permitted is exactly the secret to the human. There are two parts to me. There's a nefesh bahami, which is pure instincts and desire. There's a nefesh sickly, which is pure intellect, only want to do what's right and what's good. The human in that state would never have free will. Why? Because I would never allow myself to do something wrong. To allow for practical free will, Hashem gave us imagination. Imagination is this powerful ability to be a pirate on the seven seas, to be an Olympic athlete, to be in that world of imagination. And that power called imagination allows me to take whatever I did that's wrong and make it right. No human being ever did anything wrong, not Tuga Crowley, not the worst criminals in the world, not the Nazis. Everyone lives with this reality. What I did was right, and the reason is because I can't possibly do anything wrong. I would never do it. To allow the human free will to do that which is wrong, Hashem gave us this vivid imagination, this ability to imagine things that aren't true. And the corollary part of it is that the human is so great then unless I had that, I never could do these things wrong. But once you understand that, you understand how damaging criticism is, you understand how devastating it is to a relationship, and you understand that the words should never be used, because I have a very hard problem relating to the fact that I've done something wrong, and I surely don't want to hear it. Let me close with one last story that I think well encapsulates these concepts. If you've ever read the book Tzaddik in a Time, Rabbi Levin, who the book is about, was a tremendous, tremendous righteous person, a real tzaddik and a very, very great man. He used to go to the prisons in Eretz Yisrael before the state of Israel was declared, and typically most of the prisoners were actually very great individuals who were fighting for Jewish rights. They were Irgun members or members of the then later to be Tzahal. But there were in the prisons also some good old-fashioned criminals. In his various times he would go, there was one gentleman who was not religious at all, and he was in for murder. Rabbi Levin would go visit him each day when he would go, and would press upon him the importance of keeping Torah, the importance of doing mitzvahs. One day, Rabbi Levin got this man to agree to put on tefillin. So Rabbi Levin brings in tefillin to this man, and he wants to put it on the man's left hand, where he should put it on. And the man said, I can't put it on the hand. This hand murdered a human. I can't put it on this hand. Let's put it on this hand. So in fact, Rabbi Levin put the tefillin on the other hand, and this hand put the tefillin shirosha, and they made the brachos with him, took the tefillin off. Now, I want to share with you something very interesting about that story. I've never witnessed a murder, but to my knowledge, no hand ever jumped off a table and stabbed somebody. That's not how it works. The way it works in a real life murder is a human being decides to kill another human being, takes whatever implement he has handy, whether it be a knife, a gun, or whatever, and stabs the other human being. The hand didn't kill that person. The man killed him. Yet listen to what this man said. Don't put the tefillin on this hand. This hand killed the man. Put it on this hand. What kind of insane concept is that? The hand didn't kill the man. You killed him. But you know what the answer to that is? The answer is that the guilt of having killed a man is too great. I can't deal with it. I put it off onto something else. The hand did it. This hand is the killer hand. This hand should be cut off. This hand can't put on tefillin. But it can't be me. You see, the human being cannot live with that concept. The human being can't live with guilt. The human being can't live with the idea that I did something wrong, because I'm hypersensitive to that. And that is one of the greatest concepts to understand in human relations. If I am hypersensitive to that, well, every other person I deal with is also a human and is equally sensitive to those things. And understanding that makes a huge difference in understanding how we relate to other people and how other people relate to us. May Hashem grant us the wisdom, understanding, ability to put this into practice.